This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Toronto Region Board of Trade's Hit Go podcast. I'm the board's president and CEO, Jan De Silva. We can't wait to hear your thoughts on this kickoff episode of our Climate Economy mini-series. Why make a mini-series on the climate economy? Well, beyond this podcast, this subject's a massive priority for us for many reasons. First, one of the board's most active communities is our Climate Economy Strategic Council. It's a table of diverse business leaders who have what it takes to develop innovative solutions and help accelerate the adoption of clean tech. We envision a future where the Toronto region leads the climate economy and reaches net zero by 2050. Bold, but we have to aim high. With an estimated global clean tech market of $2.5 trillion US, we can't wait. Climate action's crucial for obvious environmental and social reasons. We see it in our newsfeed daily. What today's panelists bring to this show is a lens on the economic opportunities ahead. This is the game changer. In this premiere episode, you'll hear from my Climate Economy Strategic Council co-chair and CEO of Mars Discovery District, Young Wu. Mars is both a public-private partnership and a not-for-profit focused on commercializing publicly funded research and tech. Young appears alongside Toronto's acting mayor, Jennifer McKelvie, who also serves as the chair of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee and a councillor for Scarborough Rouge Park. And the Business Development Bank of Canada's SVP and Head of Sustainability and Diversity, Sandra Odenhahl. The BDC is a Crown corporation and a development bank that helps create and develop domestic businesses through flexible financing and expert advisors. All panels in this series are hosted by Craig Rutan, an alumnus of the board and passionate climate policy expert. You'll hear him coax out their ideas to improve productivity in Canada, Ontario, and our region, to reframe the concept of climate action with a focus on opportunities, and how we can boost the work of local clean tech innovators to put our region on the map. Enjoy.
Let's launch into the conversation to help understand what the idea of the climate economy is. Jennifer, from your perspective as someone with your background and training, when you hear the phrase climate economy, what do you think of? And how important is it for Toronto from both an environmental and an economic perspective?
Well, it's incredibly important to the city of Toronto. And I think we know that climate change, climate resilience, and the economy are very much interconnected. To me, climate economy means that Toronto residents are working. They're working in the green tech sector. They're solving complex environmental problems. And we know that the green tech sector is continuing to grow at twice that of the rest of the economy. And we've seen it grow 3.9% versus 1.6% for other industries between 2015 and 2019. So we know it's in a growing area in the city of Toronto, and we know that it's good because it contributes to jobs, which keep people working, but it's also making a cleaner, greener planet.
Fantastic. And Young, you've done a lot of work on the innovation side of this equation to help spearhead the further uptake and growth of the sector. Can you tell us about the work that you're helping lead with the Climate Economy Strategic Council and the unique approach it's taking to spur more innovation?
Well, sure. Maybe I can build a bit off of Jennifer's opening comments, which I 2000% agree with. The fact is, there is no pathway to net zero without considering innovation in the midst of all this. Traditionally, the solutions that can actually take down I think it's about 48 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions that come from Toronto every year. The way we actually take that down has to be to bring innovations that can move out greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings, from our transportation, from our uses of energy. And there are innovation solutions that do that I see at Mars every single day when I walk in the campus. The thing is, we have to connect that to the large adopters and to the large private sector and public sector that can actually do this at scale. When we put those two things together, this is where the work of an organization with the civic leaders that form up the Climate Economy Council can really do some great work, because these just can't be lab experiments anymore. We're running out of time. And the way for us to get ahead of this is to actually do this in collaboration between our sectors. And secondly, to build on, again, Jennifer's comments, this is a multi-trillion-dollar economy we're thinking about too. So why not, create unbelievable economic opportunity for Canada and for Toronto, while at the same time taking out a greenhouse gas emission footprint at the same time.
Thank you, Young. Those are great points. And that's certainly on our mind as well, knowing the challenges that we're facing in terms of our economic productivity as a province and as a region, and a real need to spur more of that innovation. And maybe you can speak to the potential and the role that the climate economy, that sector, those businesses can play in that economic growth.
Sure. When I think about the real estate piece, for instance, there are technologies that are coming from our AI innovators. There's a company called Brainbox, for instance. HVAC systems today contribute somewhere around 20% of the footprint that comes from buildings, actually closer to half of the footprint that comes from buildings. So if you can actually autonomously manage your HVAC systems through this kind of technology, then we can actually drastically reduce, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions coming from buildings on an existing built inventory basis. On the transportation side of things, we can think about things like a company called Pantonium. This basically, creates almost like an Uber-like experience for public transportation. And this is a way for us to, again, harness the work of technology in order to reduce the footprint. But we do need to have our large sector leaders leaning into this kind of technology. For instance, at the Climate Economy Council, we have Merrick Gertler, president of U of T. He has basically set a plan for the St. George campus to actually advance its own goals in terms of going to a net zero using this kind of technology. A second example would be our Toronto Pearson and the Greater Toronto Airport Authority, which has the opportunity to kind of turn the entire GTAA into a hydrogen hub, leaning into the hydrogen hub technology. So these are some examples of us doing this at scale versus basically running with subscale lab level experiments only.
Fantastic. Thank you, Young. And I think that those individual stories really speak to the potential and things that we're facing here. Sandra, I know in your work that you work a lot with specific businesses and helping them to unlock their potential. What are you seeing and hearing from those businesses in terms of their eagerness and willingness to take part in the climate economy?
I guess what we're seeing is that the small and medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurs that BDC principally works with span the range of those who are the providers of those solutions. A lot of the companies that Young was talking about in the clean tech and the climate technology space, they are obviously very keen to apply their inventions, their innovations, their innovative way of thinking to helping solve these issues. And they do see the opportunity for scale up and growth and contributing to some step changes that are going to be needed in the way we do everything if we're going to hit our climate targets.
Thank you. Yeah. And for all of those businesses, it's interesting thinking about the connection of where they're at on their journey and what they see their role being. What are where are you seeing the real leadership opportunities? And are there any sort of companies or sectors that you're seeing that are really grabbing the reins right now to really find that place to lead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly in the, in the clean tech and climate tech space, there's a lot of amazing stuff happening in Ontario and particularly in around Toronto. One thing I would say is looking at, just stepping back a bit and looking at where the opportunities are. There was this really interesting analysis actually that was done last year, and not by BDC, but by the Canadian Climate Institute in this case, looking at the sort of the transition, the low carbon transition opportunities and risks in each of Canada's provinces, and looking at 10 sort of opportunity markets or sectors that are going to be really important in low carbon transition. What we found particularly interesting is that Ontario has a really high concentration of companies in 3 of those high opportunity areas. So one is low carbon electricity. So, solar PV and wind and hydrogen and battery, all that stuff. The second was agricultural technology and alternative proteins, because of course the ag sector, food sector is a significant contributor to GHGs. And the third is bioenergy and bioproducts, so like renewable gas plants, things like that. So those are 3 sectors that you'll see in Ontario. We're already in a position to benefit from low carbon transition opportunities. And then, of course, when you combine that with top tier academic research, the industrial base that we have in a number of sectors that are going to be critical to the transition, there are some really interesting opportunities. In terms of, again, zeroing in on Ontario, we're seeing that dollars raised among clean tech companies are really concentrated in a few of those sectors I mentioned. So low carbon electricity being a biggie, batteries and storage, bioproducts and bioenergy. Young talked about this as well, building tech. So there's a wide range of opportunities. And as you may know, BDC just doubled down on our clean tech and climate tech investing. So we've now got $1 billion committed to clean tech and carbon tech, with the November launch of $400 million on top of the $600 million that we had committed since 2018. So our BDC Capital division is really finding some incredible opportunities actually across Canada, and certainly many of them in this region.
That financing is going to be critical to unlock all of these transitions. So thanks for speaking about that. That's going to be needed for these businesses to be able to make those investments and innovate. One of the other questions I have, when we think about timelines, we hear a lot about net zero 2050, but the City of Toronto has actually put in place a more ambitious timeline to reach net zero by 2040. Jennifer, I'm wondering if you can speak about that and about the why Toronto made that decision, and what you're starting to see, if you're starting to see any shifts in how either the city is approaching its business and its role, or the broader ecosystem and collaboration that's going on.
Well, firstly, it is very exciting that Toronto does have a goal to be net zero by 2040, one of the most ambitious in North America. And that really recognizes that in Toronto, we know we need to be a leader in this space. We know we need to chart this ambitious course and lead by example so that other municipalities in Canada can also do it too. I think it's important to celebrate our wins. So I do want to say that we know now that we've met our 2020 greenhouse gas emissions. We've far exceeded it. Our goal in 2020 was a 30% reduction over 1990 levels. Our numbers say we're at 43% reduction over 1990 levels. And that's important because it shows we can do this. And we know we can do this in the City of Toronto. We are doing this. And we're charting an ambitious course. We are looking at having a carbon budget for the city that looks at greenhouse gas emissions, but then also looks at all the projects that we need to get to net zero and finding ways that we can accelerate some of that work. And we recognize that it needs to be done in partnership with our green technology sector and all the very smart people working on great many things out there. And our role really as a city is to pilot at a big scale. And that shows that it can be done for others, for private businesses, for example, that want to do it. So I'll just give you a couple examples of ways we're doing this. So the first is with our Green Market Acceleration Program. So what this does is it opens up our city assets to businesses so that they can use them. So a couple examples, Enwave, for example, is doing the deep water cooling. They're taking water from Lake Ontario, pump it up through buildings to provide cooling. And it's one of the biggest of its kind. Another is Noventa. Noventa is accessing our sewage heat at some hospitals and other big buildings. There is heat that they're recovering there and turning that into energy so that can decrease the amount of greenhouse gases that need to be burned by those buildings. So there's a good example of where we're partnering with industry. Others are things like this city's deep retrofit challenge that we've issued. And we will be giving grants up to $500,000 to support deeper than planned energy retrofits. Now, this is important for the building itself because they have those greenhouse gas reductions, but it's also important for the economy and all the technologies that will be developed and will be accelerated in implementation. They'll be moving from the pilot scale to the implementation scale through this challenge. And I stress this one in particular because buildings are our biggest emissions in Toronto, and it's 52% of emissions. And that number I always say because as myself as a scientist coming into the city, I think we all think transportation, and that's because it's very visual. You can see the steam coming out the back of the tailpipes. You can see the cars on the road. But transportation is 38% of emissions and buildings are 52%. So there's a lot to tackle there around buildings. I think it's a great opportunity for the economy, great opportunity for all these new technologies, wonderful people, including those at Mars and that our counterparts on this podcast have mentioned, to get those technologies out from development into implementation.
Those are fantastic, fantastic numbers and great example of the impact that we really do need to focus on buildings. And to be honest, that's one sector that that I grapple with in terms of really addressing the urgency of the situation. 2040 sounds far away, but it's only 17 years. And you think about all of the big buildings, mid buildings, and then all of the low-rise houses that are all going to need to be transformed to really reduce our emissions and change where the heat sources come from and what the efficiency looks like. It's a really big challenge. So, I mean, to the entire panel, how do we really grapple with the urgency of taking this action?
We don't have time to actually take a zero risk approach to this whole thing. We have so many assets, so much talent, and so much capability as the fourth largest growing city in North America, as a destination point for the talent that develops these new solutions. So I think it's a matter of getting a coalition of the willing. And it doesn't take everybody. It takes, the people that we have on our Climate Economy Strategy Council, for instance, that can take a leadership position. And to me, it's all about adoption. So one of the things I wanted to point out was that recently Mars did a program agreement with the City of Toronto and with KPMG to put together a climate impact accelerator. We don't have time to go through lengthy processes to pick off legacy solutions to solve for legacy problems here. If we can actually bring in transformational solutions through an accelerated process that allows the city, which is a huge procurement entity, to actually lead in all of this and to bring transformational technologies to the front. That's how we actually solve for the city's needs, but also translate that playbook into how we solve for major urban centers around the world, of which the city is one. This is how we can actually win in a multi-trillion-dollar climate economy and help solve the problems that we're all addressing right now in a faster period of time.
I'll echo that as well and just say that I think the City of Toronto, we do recognize we have the ability to take on more risk than smaller municipalities. And we do try to do that. And a good example is with our electric bus fleet. We went out and we got 20 buses from 3 different manufacturers. We ran those in the cold Canadian winter. So we were able to proof test that these can work efficiently here in Canada. And now we're ramping up our electric bus program. But it was important we did that because, our fleet is enormous in the City of Toronto. And so for us to purchase 60 buses, it's not the same as smaller communities to the north, to the west, to the east of us. So that is something that we do have to do, and we have a responsibility around. Another example of how we have people coming together is with Mayor Tory's Green Will Initiative. And through that, we have brought together all the major landowners in the City of Toronto. So the Cadillac Fairviews, the Oxfords, Brookfields, the hospital network, the academic, the networks. So the universities are part of that. And and the City of Toronto, which is also a major real estate holder, especially through Toronto Community Housing. So bringing them together to explore net zero strategies together. And that's important because then you have the ability to start procurement at a higher level and work together on building that capacity around, for example, making sure there is a supply chain around heat pumps. I don't think we have enough of a supply chain around heat pumps right now. So looking at what are those procurement gaps that we have, what are those supply chain issues, and how can these big real estate owners work together to have true reductions in greenhouse gas emissions.
Those are great examples of collaboration. Sandra, what are your thoughts on the question of this urgency and grappling with it?
So I guess three things. I think the first thing is in terms of grasping the urgency, I think that extreme weather is helping everybody grasp the urgency, which is, the one good thing about the craziness that we see in the weather these days. But I think that does lead to three things. I think number one is I would actually like to say we should make sure we're being honest with people about the fact that the hard work that we're doing to reduce man-made GHG emissions isn't going to prevent another couple of decades of global warming. So we're looking at a couple of decades of locked-in extreme weather. So I'd say I don't think we're grasping the urgency of needing to get on with aggressive adaptation planning and strategies. I feel like a lot of, and that is definitely a public policy as well as a business planning issue. And so it would be good to see some more aggressive movement at the municipal, provincial, and national level on climate adaptation, because we're stuck with this trend no matter what we do. If we could turn off the tap tomorrow, we're still headed for some bad stuff before it gets better. So I think that's the first comment I'd make about urgency. I think the second one is 100% agreeing with Jennifer and Young on two fronts. One piece is we really need to make sure that public policy, again, all levels of government, has to enable some very unsexy things to happen. And I'm thinking about, ensuring a low carbon electricity grid. The thing with buildings is that you can't decarbonize buildings if they need oil and gas to make sure that people stay alive in the winter. So, if we're going to decarbonize buildings, the electricity grid has to not emit, or there has to be affordable alternatives in terms of, sources of energy, in local sources of energy that are also non-emitting at a massive scale. So low carbon electricity, I'm going to say public transit. We don't want millions and millions of cars, even if they're all EVs, cars and trucks. We actually still have to get people out of their cars and make it easy for them to get around in low carbon public transit. These are the boring things. EV charging infrastructure, I think there's a recognition of that and a lot of efforts underway on that front. It's also something we at BDC are looking at how we can help our customers with buildings, effectively, efficiently, and economically make EV charging available. Net zero ready building codes, incentives and regs to move homes. What about all those individual homeowners moving homes? And I would put even small businesses away from oil and gas. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, I think, on the urgency front that I know that all levels of government are thinking about, but it's really just, it's a lot of work. And, there's a lot of economic challenges to making all these things happen, in addition to getting everybody to agree that these are priorities in communities and provinces in the country. And then the third bucket definitely is, dealing with the urgency is leveraging. I think the only way we're going to hit these targets, and this is Sandra speaking, not necessarily BDC, but honestly, I like math. I'm an engineer. We are not going to hit these targets without massive turnover in infrastructure. And I don't know physically if it's possible to do it in the timelines we set for ourselves, and or a massive step change. This is where Young Wu's interest and what he was talking about comes in at Mars, and certainly BDC's clean tech focus comes in we need a massive step change in technology to enable us to do the things that we want to do as a society with way less emissions and at a cost that's palatable and possible for everybody. So, I think on a big picture, we need both those things. And the step change in technologies, the scale up of those innovations does require financing, academic support, all the things that I think we all violently agree, and things that are moving along, but we can't take our pedal off the gas at all, because without that step change and without the massive shift in infrastructure, this is not happening, not just in Canada, but anywhere. I would add one other thing, if I may. I really also want to say there is no net zero without small business. And, one of the things that we've seen, and I talked about it briefly in earlier comments, is appropriately perhaps a focus on, the big corporations, big emitters, big transformations in resource industries, and a lot of very necessary shifts that are required. But it's estimated, because we don't have actual data, but it's estimated that, anywhere from 30 to 50% of emissions come from small and medium-sized businesses. And small and medium-sized businesses, they're kind of like all those millions of homeowners. They don't have teams of engineers and sustainability experts, and they're not paying consultants $500 an hour to help them figure out how to decarbonize. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to run their business. They can't find talent. They're just coming out of the pandemic. So I think one of the things that we care deeply about at BDC is how is small business and medium-sized business going to be supported and enabled in a practical, size-appropriate way to contribute to and benefit from the low-carbon transition. It's not a small question, and it's an exciting one. It's why I joined BDC. I just found that whole area fascinating, because over 95% of Canadians work in small and medium-sized businesses. It's real stuff.
Absolutely. I think you did a great job summarizing all of those many things that we're going to have to do to enable this transition. And if I can, I'd like to jump us forward just to close out to 2040 and to really think about, we often think about the challenges, but I'd really like to close this by focusing on the opportunities that we see here. So I'd love to go to each of you in 30 seconds or less, just one thing that you'd really hope that we'll be seeing in Toronto, in our economy, by 2040, by the time we've made a lot of these changes. Young, can I start with you?
Sure. I like to think about the future in terms of how do we build from strength. One of the things that I see every day at Mars, to Sandra's point, small, medium-sized enterprises, but they're high growth. They contributed more than $30 billion to GDP already since we started measuring this. They're growing at 20% compound annual rate per year. That's about a 10x on Canada and Ontario. These are the companies that we need to start to be able to walk and chew gum with. Yes, transition, but also start to assemble portfolios that can actually mitigate the drawdown of greenhouse gas emissions that are going to occur between now and 2040. That's how Toronto is going to win. That's how we create jobs for the future. And that's how we actually take an outsized role in a global economy that are built on our teams, our people, our talent, and us as a destination.
Fantastic. Thanks, Young. Sandra, what about you?
I would like to be a magnet for global companies that want to locate in a place with a workforce that is, and we already have this, that is highly skilled and capable. We're a magnet because the financing is available, both VC and other types of financing for these companies, and incentives where needed, and where there's a really great support, where there's a zero carbon electricity grid if you want to locate your enterprise, whatever your global enterprise is, needs to run on electricity. They're going to be looking for places where they can run in a low carbon jurisdiction. We have everything they need to succeed in the economy of the future.
Thank you. And final word to Jennifer.
Well, I think by 2040, first of all, I want the City of Toronto to reach their net zero target. I am a little bit competitive. I think most Toronto residents are. So let's be first. Let's be proud about that. Let's show that we are a leader in this space and chart an ambitious course that others can follow, and successfully having piloted many technologies that then have bloomed into full-scale implementation. And the second is, just like Sandra said, with resilient, that we have a resilient Toronto that has tackled the impacts of climate change, which she's quite right, we didn't focus on enough and we don't talk about enough. And we've dealt with what I call the 4 Ws, and that is the wetter, wilder, warmer weather that we know that we're going to be faced with. So that's my hope, that in 2040, we've both hit those goals for climate mitigation, for decreasing greenhouse gases in the City of Toronto, but also our goals for adaptation, and we are a more resilient Toronto.
Fantastic. Jennifer, Sandra, Young, thank you all so much for your time today, for sharing your expertise and your leadership, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great talking to you all.
Well, that concludes the premiere episode of our Climate Economy mini-series. We hoped you enjoyed this conversation and are thinking about climate action in new ways. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your favorite platform so you'll never miss an episode. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a review. This helps us reach more listeners like you. We'd be delighted if you took a moment to share this show with your network too. Please tag us when you do. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Hit Go.
This is Story Studio Network.